So this might actually be one of the cheapest real Steam machine builds you can put together right now. Because at first glance, this thing just looks like some weird stripped-down graphics card. But it's not. This is the ASRock AMD BC-250. And for around $100, you're getting a board with a 6-core, 12-thread Zen 2 CPU, a 24 compute unit RDNA 2 GPU, and 16 gigs of unified GDDR6 memory. Now the reason people are suddenly paying attention to this board is pretty obvious. The value is kind of insane. The BC-250 is more like a compact all-in-one system board. The CPU is here, the GPU is here, the memory is here. It's basically the core of a gaming system already built into one board. And that's what makes it so interesting. People usually describe it as a cut-down PS5-style APU. And no, that doesn't mean you're literally getting a PlayStation 5 on a board. But it does mean the hardware is way more capable than you'd expect for the price. On the CPU side, you've got 6 Zen 2 cores and 12 threads, boosting to around 3.5 GHz. On the GPU side, you get 24 RDNA 2 compute units. And then you've got 16 gigs of GDDR6 shared between the system and graphics. That memory setup is pretty unusual for PC hardware, but for gaming, it's one of the coolest things about this board. Now, of course, there's a catch. This is not plug and play. If you buy one of these, you're not getting a finished mini PC. You're getting a bare board. So you still need a power supply, storage, and some kind of cooling solution. The good news is, power is actually pretty simple. It only needs one 8-pin PCIe power connector, just like a graphics card, so you don't need anything too crazy here. A decent 350-watt power supply should be enough for this kind of build. Storage is also pretty straightforward because there's an M.2 slot on the board. Now, it is slower than what you'd get on a modern desktop platform. It's only PCIe 2.0 by 2, but for a budget gaming machine, it's still completely usable. Cooling is where things get a little more custom. This board was originally meant to live in a server with airflow moving straight across the heatsink. So if you're putting it on a desk or inside some custom case, you've got to solve that part yourself. A blower fan can work. A custom case would be better. And if you really wanted to make the whole thing look clean, a 3D printed enclosure would probably make a huge difference. So, yeah, it's cheap. In the BIOS, you can choose how much of that 16 gigs of memory gets reserved for the GPU. A good starting point is 8 gigs for the system and 8 gigs for graphics. That's a nice balanced setup, and for gaming, it makes a lot of sense. There are also modified BIOS versions out there that let you tweak even more, like fan behavior and deeper memory settings. But that's probably something you only want to mess with if you already know what you're doing. One of the biggest gains here comes from overclocking the GPU. Stock clocks are around 1500 MHz, but pushing it closer to 2000 MHz can make a really noticeable difference. And I don't mean one of those tiny benchmark-only improvements. I mean the kind of difference where a game goes from feeling borderline to actually feeling good to play. So yeah, this weird old server board is basically a super cheap gaming platform. And the crazy part is, it actually works. So today, I want to see if this thing really makes sense as a low-cost Linux gaming machine, what you need to get it running, and whether it's actually worth building into a budget Steam machine. Now, when it comes to software, Linux makes a lot of sense here. SteamOS can boot on this hardware, but Bazzite is probably the more practical option for a build like this, because it gives you that Steam machine-style experience, while also making things a lot easier if you want to tune the system or overclock the GPU. And that matters, because this board actually responds really well to tuning. And once you get everything set up, that's where the BC-250 starts getting genuinely impressive. In older games, it does exactly what you'd hope. Something like Left 4 Dead 2 at 1080p max settings runs effortlessly. High frame rates, no drama, no surprises. For games like that, this thing honestly feels like overkill. But obviously, the more important question is modern games. And surprisingly, the answer is actually pretty positive, as long as you keep your expectations realistic. Because for newer AAA games, 1080p is really the sweet spot. You are not building some crazy 4K monster here. That's not what this is. What you are building is a very cheap gaming box that can handle modern games pretty well if you use sensible settings. Medium to high settings are often realistic. And stuff like FSR and frame generation helps a lot. That becomes really obvious in heavier games. Something like Spider-Man 2 or Cyberpunk 2077 can get close to that 60 FPS target on their own, but once you turn on frame generation, the whole experience starts to feel a lot better. And that's when this weird old server board starts feeling less like a fun experiment, and more like a genuinely capable budget gaming PC. The Witcher 3 fits into that pretty nicely too. At 1080p high settings, it's very playable. Ultra starts pushing things a bit too far if you want a consistently smooth experience, but high settings feels about right. Forza Horizon 5 is also very playable at 1080p medium. And even if the frame rate moves around a little, locking it to 60 would still give you a solid experience. So at that point, the pattern becomes pretty clear. This thing is not about brute force. It's about value. If a game supports modern upscaling and frame generation, the BC-250 becomes way more attractive. And if the game is older or lighter, then this board can feel way more powerful than its price would suggest. Now, I don't think this is for everyone. If you want something polished, quiet, compact, and ready to go right out of the box, this probably isn't the best option. At that point, a regular mini PC or a used desktop might make more sense. But if you like weird hardware, Linux gaming, and DIY-style builds, then this thing becomes really hard to ignore. Because once you add everything up, the value is honestly kind of ridiculous. Around $100 for the board, plus a modest power supply, a fan, and some storage. And you can end up with a capable 1080p gaming machine, built from hardware most people would never even think to use this way. And that's really what makes it cool. The BC-250 is weird. It's unconventional, it takes some setup, but that's exactly why it stands out. It turns old, overlooked server hardware into something fun, usable, and surprisingly good for gaming. So in the end, this is probably one of the most interesting ultra-budget Linux gaming builds out there right now. Not because it's perfect, but because it gives you way more than you'd expect for the money. If you like experimenting, if you like pushing hardware beyond what it was originally meant to do, and if you want a cheap Steam machine-style project, this thing makes a really strong case for itself. And honestly, that might be the best part of the whole idea.